This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Oh boy, haven't heard that one before. But that's a shame if you haven't heard how Surfshark VPN allows for top-of-the-line protection online. Did you know how much of your personal info can be stolen just by simply using public Wi-Fi? Or all of your personal data that could be obtained by seemingly trustworthy websites? You don't even have to give them specifically anything. They can just pry so much of it by just looking at their IP address of yours. Well, thanks to Surfshark, you can browse the web without that fear by simply signing up and swapping over to a different IP address. That way, your personal data is as safe as possible. You can also use it to do all kinds of fun stuff, like accessing a streaming service's catalog in a different region. Just change your IP address with Surfshark and boom! Canadian Netflix. Surfshark VPN not only helps you stay more private, but oddly enough, gives you more freedom than ever before on the internet. It's truly the best thing I've been talking about for the past 60 seconds. Go to surfshark.com/stash or use code STASH at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN.
I'm just gonna say it. I have no fucking idea what's going on here. You ever have one of those moments where you take a look back at the long lineage of one of your favorite game franchises and realize none of this makes any fucking sense? Well, congratulations, Scott, because you're having one of those moments. The Donkey Kong franchise is a goddamn mess. And listen, after the release of Donkey Kong Bonanza, most people who are gonna be saying that kind of thing are mostly talking about the lore of the franchise. Because you have the first Donkey Kong right here, where Donkey Kong kidnaps Pauline, who is rescued by Mario. Then in Donkey Kong Country, it's stated that Cranky Kong was the original arcade Donkey Kong, so this new Donkey Kong is the son of Cranky Kong, which would make this Donkey Kong the grown-up variant of Donkey Kong Jr. Okay, so that would make this Donkey Kong the same as that. But Donkey Kong on the Game Boy released the exact same year as Donkey Kong Country, which shows the original Donkey Kong with the modern versions of Mario and Pauline right alongside the original Donkey Kong Jr. I guess apes grow up very quickly. But then you have Mario Tennis on N64, where this version of Donkey Kong is playing tennis right alongside Donkey Kong Jr. Now, to be fair, I mean, Mario is in this game right alongside Baby Mario, so this could just be some time-traveling shenanigans. And either way, part of the reason for Donkey Kong Country to be here was to turn Donkey Kong one of Nintendo's biggest names, biggest mascots, you know, the guy, the game that started Nintendo as we know it today, back in the arcades. It was all to turn him into one of their A-listers, one of their most popular characters, and to do that, they needed to turn him into the main protagonist instead of the antagonist and make him more of a hero. Which makes sense that they would make this Donkey Kong the descendant of the arcade Donkey Kong. This Donkey Kong respects women. But then Donkey Kong Bonanza had to come along and just confuse the hell out of everybody, because here we have a game that includes all of these references to all of these Donkey Kong games before, yet they include Pauline as a child. What the fuck does that mean? There's loads of theories floating around because Donkey Kong Bonanza is effectively a prequel to Super Mario Odyssey, or is it? Because, spoiler alert, you know, we can talk about something for like 10 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled. So, you know, just to give you a little bit of a heads up. Yeah, you ever look at Donkey Kong's hands on this box? It's fucking weird. Yeah, New Donk City at the end of Donkey Kong Bonanza kind of looks a little too modern to really be like, oh yeah, this took place before Super Mario Odyssey. I think I remember there being a developer interview where the devs pretty much say like, oh yeah, you know, a lot of people are wondering what, you know, why is Pauline a kid in this game? And all we have to say is play the game and decide for yourself what that means, and pretty much, I don't know what the fuck that means. From what I've seen, it's heavily implied that this Pauline is the child granddaughter of this Pauline. But I think Nintendo's on record pretty much saying that, yeah, the jump man in the original Donkey Kong, that's always been Mario. That's not like Mario's grandfather or whatever. But I gotta be honest, there's enough stuff going on where I think it honestly makes more sense that this is more of like a sequel to Mario Odyssey. Because like, yeah, okay, why the fuck in New Donk City? Are there billboards showing Lanky Kong? Hell, why is it even called New Donk City? Because back in Mario Odyssey, during the New Donk City Festival, like, it pays tribute to the original Donkey Kong arcade game. And, you know, Pauline and Mario talk like they're old friends. You know, it's obvious that they've met before. So it makes sense that the city is kind of themed after that, even though Pauline pretty much said that, like, oh yeah, you know, getting kidnapped by that fucking ape was traumatic for me. Oh, but it's like, okay, this city for some reason is themed after Kongs. Let's just settle on that. So as much as it would have made sense that potentially, like, oh yeah, the events of Donkey Kong Bonanza when Donkey Kong is pretty much saving New Donk City, it's like, okay, so that would go on to pretty much inspire the New Donk City Festival in Mario Odyssey. But that doesn't make any sense because that festival is themed around arcade Donkey Kong, which is already said to have been Cranky Kong. And Pauline was kidnapped by Donkey Kong there. So why the wouldn't she mention, oh yeah, actually Donkey Kong's a cool fucking guy. He saved the city. No, the entire New Donk City Festival is about, like, celebrating the fact that, like, oh yeah, Donkey Kong was fucking conquered. Well, then why are street names named after Donkey Kong characters like Cranky or K. Rool or whatever? So all right, that already doesn't make sense, but it honestly is starting to make more sense that Donkey Kong Bonanza is like a sequel to Mario Odyssey, but like it takes place far in the future, where this Pauline is actually the granddaughter of this Pauline, but this Pauline is still the same Pauline for Mario Odyssey. And you know what sucks is I'm definitely fucking up somewhere and I forgot a piece of lore. I don't know. The point is, they made Pauline a kid in this game for gameplay purposes, and I think they just kind of like made it intentionally vague because I honestly think Nintendo kind of likes there to be like a little bit of nonsense to their games, like lore and stories. And you know what? Screw it. It's honestly kind of fun. Would it be as fun to talk about Donkey Kong Bonanza and the Donkey Kong lore if it actually made sense? I've heard a lot of people say how Nintendo doesn't give a shit about their stories or lore or anything like that, and I would actually disagree. I think it's funny to look at a game like DK Bonanza and people use that as an example of Nintendo not caring about, you know, lore and stories and whatnot, but you know, it just shows that they're willing to tweak a lot of stuff to fit the gameplay they want to move forward with. But I mean, like, you look at all of the Easter eggs and all of the dialogue in DK Bonanza, they really care about actually honoring the continuity of this franchise. They made damn sure to follow like every rule in the book. They have Diddy Kong saying like, oh yeah, remember that time that we did this in Donkey Kong Country 2? It's like they do care, and the Pauline thing, can make sense if you make it make sense yourself. And I think Nintendo kept it intentionally vague because they want everybody to have kind of their own little theory as to what it means. But strangely enough, this isn't what I actually wanted to talk about starting this video. But it definitely helps to address my point that the Donkey Kong series is a fucking mess. This series has been all over the place throughout the years, more so than I think most Nintendo series. You can even look at the messiest Nintendo series. Like, I would say Star Fox is a pretty messy Nintendo series, but most Star Fox games play like Star Fox. Even Star Fox games that don't play like Star Fox, like Star Fox Adventures, when the next game in the franchise came out, Star Fox Assault, it actually took elements from Star Fox Adventures and kind of incorporated it into it. So it kind of just felt like it's like, okay, this was a natural kind of sidestep for the Star Fox franchise. And you look at stuff like Kirby, okay? Kirby has been as consistent as consistency itself. You look at the first Kirby game and you keep going throughout all the different entries and it makes sense where we are right now. Yes, there's been offshoots and spin-offs and new ideas, but for the most part, you can see the consistent idea and direction of the franchise. Same with Zelda and even Mario. You know, Mario kind of made a big leap from 2D to 3D. Like, you fundamentally look at how Mario 64 functions, and it's quite a bit different from how things were with 2D Mario games before that. You look at Mario World and you're going from point A to point B, pretty straightforward. Mario 64 has only like a dozen or so like 3D levels to explore around with multiple missions in them. That is a huge departure from how Mario games functioned prior. But what is Mario all about? It's fundamentally, hey, you have a giant obstacle course to go through. You want to get from point A to point B. And Mario 64 still retains that. You're still going through an obstacle course. It's just in this big open level. You're still trying to get from point A to point B. Point A just so happens to be at the start of the level, and point B is where the power star is. And I think that's definitely oversimplifying things, but you can definitely see where these franchises started and where they are right now and where they were in the middle, and it all kind of makes sense. Donkey Kong isn't that. The original arcade games themselves were already kind of all over the place. With the original, Donkey Kong is the villain. In the sequel, Mario is the villain, and you control Donkey Kong Jr. So Donkey Kong Jr. is the hero, and Donkey Kong is the victim. And then Donkey Kong 3, he's back to being the villain again, and you just have fucking Stanley the Bugman. And that game was like a vertical shooter. I don't know. From my point of view, the main ethos of the Donkey Kong arcade series is you gotta go up. I know, that was kind of the iconic phrase from the original arcade version of Donkey Kong. How high can you get? You always want to get to the top. In the original Donkey Kong, you want to get to the top to save Pauline. In Donkey Kong Jr., you want to get to the top to save Donkey Kong. And in Donkey Kong 3, you want Donkey Kong to get to the top. You want to spray him enough with your bug spray to get him pretty much off the screen. And then it's a little poetic. In Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., at the very end of the stages, you want to bring things down. You know, you want to push up all the keys in Donkey Kong Jr. In the original Donkey Kong, you want to kind of like tear down all of the girders by collecting all that crap and then bringing Donkey Kong down. So from my perspective, that's what makes the original Donkey Kong arcade series what it is. But moving forward, as games got more and more complicated, you can't just focus on that. Sure, you could keep making Donkey Kong games. Like, I guarantee you could have made a Donkey Kong 4 with that kind of design mindset. But games were getting deeper and more enriching. Like, they became actual adventures. And after this, Mario kind of spun off into his own series of games. You had Mario Brothers in the arcade, and then you had Super Mario Brothers, and the rest is history. But in the early to mid 90s, Nintendo obviously kind of wanted to bring Donkey Kong back as one of their star players. And before Donkey Kong Country kind of reinvented the whole thing, they actually took another crack at arcade Donkey Kong and kind of reinvented it for the Game Boy. Now this game right here does not play around with the go high mentality of the original Donkey Kong arcade games. Instead, it restructures things to turn this into a puzzle platformer. And I honestly think this made all the sense in the world. This is how you make original Donkey Kong make sense in a more modern way. Modern being 1994. Because high scores didn't make sense anymore. It didn't make sense to just keep playing the same couple of stages over and over again and to just see how far you can get. This rethought out what Donkey Kong could be and turned each stage into a little puzzle that you have to solve as Mario, with a lot of the same kind of visual identity of that original Donkey Kong arcade game. You know, while the screen can scroll at times, everything is still pretty compact. You only have a couple of things to notice at once, and you have to try to traverse these giant stages, solve the puzzle, grab the key, get to the door, onto the next portion. This right here is my favorite original Game Boy game, just easily. It's a game that's completely timeless. You can play this right now and it doesn't really feel like, oh wow, this doesn't feel like a 30-plus-year-old game. It feels like it's like 27. But still, as much as I love this game, I think it goes to show that, like, yeah, a lot of these icons from the arcades in the 80s, they definitely needed to evolve with the times. And what was super popular in the 90s? It was the mascot platformers. You can see stuff like this was definitely attempted by many other icons from the arcades, like Pac-Man, Frogger, and there was definitely some varying success. I mean, these two games right here are some of the most infamous in their respective franchises. You know, both of these characters had really good, more modern games after their arcade boom. Like back during the PS2 GBA days, Frogger had a fair amount of games that still followed kind of that overhead hopping maze-like gameplay. Kind of took the idea of arcade Frogger and turned it into more of a full-blown adventure, which made a ton of sense. However, I just don't really think that made Frogger that exciting. It's like, okay, a game like this actually feels like a Frogger game. Like you pop this in and it's just like, oh damn, this is like a modern Frogger game. And while that's fun and respectable, you compare that to the other games coming out at the time, and it just doesn't really hold much of a candle. It's just not very exciting. I think Pac-Man's been more successful in terms of staying relevant, but even then, I mean, like you look at Pac-Man World 2, you know, a personal favorite of mine. I remember playing this game as a kid. This game doesn't really have a ton to do with like that original arcade Pac-Man. Like it's still Pac-Man, it's the character Pac-Man, but they didn't really think about like, okay, what's the ethos of arcade Pac-Man? Yeah, there are segments of the game that are maze themed and, you know, you're collecting Pac dots and fruit and you're, you know, defeating the ghosts and stuff. But, you know, for the most part, I'd say this game has like 20% Pac-Man stuff in it, and 80% of it's kind of just like, it's just kind of a generic 3D platformer. A good 3D platformer, but it's like, you gotta have some creative liberties with making a 3D platforming adventure game out of literally the source material being a black background, blue maze, and a yellow smiley face. The point I'm trying to make is, this is pretty much what they had to do with Donkey Kong Country. Because yeah, this fundamentally doesn't really have any similarities to the original Donkey Kong. Hell, do you even realize like Donkey Kong didn't even have his tie before like this general era? That original arcade flyer of Donkey Kong, I always picture it with him in a tie, but like no, like pretty much this and Donkey Kong 94. This is where the tie starts to make an appearance. The opening has Cranky Kong playing the original Donkey Kong theme until the new Donkey Kong comes in, pretty much kicks him out, and bam, you're in Donkey Kong Country. They retain some iconography from the arcade game, specifically the barrels. There's like oil drums in the game, like, you know, the arcade Donkey Kong had oil drums. Yep. Fellas, next time you complain about a reboot of a game changing too much, look back to Donkey Kong Country. There's jack shit to do with Donkey Kong in this game. It might as well be a brand new IP. Hell, they even made a new character, Diddy Kong, when they could have used the original Donkey Kong Jr., but like I said at the beginning, maybe they wanted this Donkey Kong to only be a hero, so you have Cranky Kong, that was the original Donkey Kong, and he's kind of an asshole. What initially happened was they were planning on making Diddy Kong just flat out Donkey Kong Jr., but when the developers of this game, Rare, went to Nintendo and showed them the design of Diddy Kong, who they were originally calling Donkey Kong Jr., Nintendo said, that's not Donkey Kong Jr. Either make him a new guy or make that Donkey Kong Jr. And they decided to make this Diddy Kong. So yeah, Donkey Kong Country is now taking place entirely in the jungle, which has never really been an element of the original arcade Donkey Kong. To be fair, that was more so the setting of Donkey Kong Jr., but it's kind of hard to really remember that considering, you know, the backgrounds back then were just completely black. Donkey Kong 3, I think, takes place in a greenhouse, so yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Donkey Kong Country, yes, it was entirely the first time Donkey Kong's been in the jungle, I'll concede. And it's totally not the first time we've seen Donkey Kong surrounded by bananas. But DKC kind of like recontextualizes bananas within the DK franchise and makes like Donkey Kong completely banana obsessed. But when it comes to the gameplay, DKC is completely its own thing. While these are both still like platformers, DKC is definitely more of a platformer that makes sense in 1994. You have a world map screen, you have secrets, you have collectibles. I mean, these two games are fundamentally in two separate series. I wouldn't even call Donkey Kong Country a reboot. I would call it a complete reinvention of the Donkey Kong series and Donkey Kong character as a whole. And it was a massive success. I mean, this game completely rejuvenated the DK brand. And throughout the 90s, Donkey Kong was in fact one of Nintendo's biggest stars. I mean, this became one of the best-selling games on Super Nintendo. And I think that was definitely partially due to the ad campaign really highlighting the amazing graphics of this game. I mean, this game blew everybody away back then. People would say this was pretty much unlike anything else they had ever seen up to this point. And it was a pretty big moment for the Super Nintendo because at the time, Sega was kind of pushing a lot of very expensive add-ons to buy with the Sega Genesis, the Sega CD, the Sega 32X. And to blow all that money on all that crap to get better graphics on the Sega Genesis when Donkey Kong Country looked incredible and you didn't need any stupid ass add-ons, that was just a huge deal. On top of the fact that the game was incredibly fun. I wouldn't say Donkey Kong Country was like the most innovative thing gameplay-wise. It was a really solid 2D platformer, and it had its own kind of unique feel to it. It was something that anybody could pick up and play, but you really had to sit down and really understand like the minutia of Donkey Kong Country. You know, what makes this game unique, and how does this game control and feel? Because it is kind of deceptively simple at first, but I find that a lot of people that are really used to, say, like 2D Mario games, they pick up Donkey Kong Country, whether it's, you know, the Super Nintendo games or, you know, Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, and they're kind of just like taken aback by like, whoa, this is really hard and this is really different, you know, like, oh, why is Donkey Kong so heavy? But I feel like that's kind of what makes Donkey Kong Country so enjoyable, is the fact that it's not 2D Mario. It's kind of its own thing, though it is a pretty straightforward setup for a 2D platformer. But man, you got to admit, people love that there Donkey Kong Country. Maybe a little too much. Yeah, this was pretty nuts. 3 Donkey Kong Country games within 3 years. And not only that, 3 alternate versions of the games on the Game Boy as well. Now, all of these kind of have the same design ethos, you know, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. DKC2 is obviously one of the best in the franchise. DKC3, not the strongest one, but still really good. The Donkey Kong Land games are interesting to look back on, but like, holy crap, I don't really want to play these, but they all still at least follow the design ethos of Donkey Kong Country. Fundamentally, this is how Donkey Kong games play now. Until they didn't. Yeah, Donkey Kong 64, pretty infamous title these days, but back when it first released, I mean, this game was lauded. This was a critically acclaimed title. I think it mostly came down to the fact that this game was impressively large at the time, but of course, playing it these days, that's one of its biggest flaws. Well, not even the fact that it's impressively large. This game just loves to waste your goddamn time. Gotta be honest, this game retains pretty much none of the satisfying elements of the Donkey Kong Country games on Super Nintendo. This is kind of similar to going from 2D Mario to 3D Mario, but it's not at the same time. You know, 3D Mario was quite a bit different from 2D Mario, but I feel like it still kind of had that same vibe. DK64, I don't really feel has that Donkey Kong Country sauce. The gameplay setup is entirely different. It's a 3D collectathon that honestly kind of reminds me more of like a Metroid game in some instances. It's pretty much this giant world where you have all of these areas that you can't access right now until you get the correct character, and then you get the move that you need for that character to then go to this gate and finally get it open. And that's in addition to collecting all the different bananas, but of course, oh, the big problem here, different bananas are colored to different characters. Donkey Kong can't collect Diddy Kong's bananas, and the only way you can swap between characters is going to these damn barrels and then swapping to the characters and then going back, collecting the thing that you need. Oh, then you gotta swap to a different character to collect this completely bullshit small thing. Yeah, in my opinion, this isn't Donkey Kong Country. This is more so a poorly designed, incredibly bloated version of Banjo-Kazooie. That's not to say I hate Donkey Kong 64. To be fair, I haven't, you know, beaten it, so it's kind of just like, I feel like that sentiment may change if I actually try to beat it, but just playing for like 2 hours today, I was kind of going like, okay, this is a quality game for the time, but even within the first 2 hours, I'm already getting kind of annoyed. But regardless, while this is a successor to Donkey Kong Country 3, oh, they even mention DKC3, like this is the successor to that game. But to me, this is so far and away a completely different thing from Donkey Kong Country. To be fair though, while I don't think Mario 64 was this drastic of a change from 2D Mario, this is at least kind of like what I think they felt like they needed to do during this era. Like, we're jumping to 3D, things need to change, and we need to fundamentally change what Donkey Kong gameplay is. But at this point, like, I just think like this is also another completely different type of Donkey Kong game that really has nothing to do with the arcade Donkey Kong. This has really no real gameplay similarities to the Donkey Kong Country formula on Super Nintendo. So at this point, I gotta ask, what's next? All right, why would you answer my question with a riddle? And a riddle that doesn't make any goddamn sense at that. Yeah, this was one of the strangest eras for Donkey Kong. And I think a lot of it was kind of birthed out of the fact that Rare, the main developer of the Donkey Kong Country games and Donkey Kong Land and DK64, they were bought by Microsoft, which meant nearly all of the games they were developing for Nintendo consoles had to shift over to the original Xbox or get reworked or something. Like grabbed by the ghoulies, as we can see here from the creators of Donkey Kong Country. Rare had a couple of Donkey Kong projects in the works for GameCube and Game Boy Advance. Most of the Game Boy Advance games here, they just kind of reworked to be their own IP. So Banjo Pilot was originally being developed as Diddy Kong Pilot, and It's Mr. Pants was originally a Donkey Kong themed puzzle game called Coconut Crackers. But that was kind of the interesting thing, because Microsoft wasn't in the handheld market, they still allowed Rare to release some Game Boy Advance games and continue working with Nintendo when it came to the Game Boy Advance ports of the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy. But when it came to mainline home console games, yeah, Rare couldn't make more games for Nintendo. So during the GameCube era, the Donkey Kong franchise was in this weird place where there was still a consistent amount of stuff coming out. I mean, honestly, we were getting more Donkey Kong content here than ever before. Like I already said, the Donkey Kong Country games made their way over to Game Boy Advance. We also got this new type of DK game called DK King of Swing, which, yeah, this is primarily more of a puzzle platformer. But the most notable thing Donkey Kong was all about during this era were these goddamn bongos. The DK bongos, designed by Nintendo as an accessory for the GameCube, primarily for use with Donkey Konga. This game was developed by Namco and is a rhythm game that plays in pretty much the exact same style as Taiko Drum Master, also developed by Namco. Definitely a cool concept for a game, and it makes a lot of sense. You know, you have bongos that look just like DK barrels, you slap the bongos. It just feels very in line with the Donkey Kong character. It's themed perfectly surrounding the DK franchise. This did make a lot of sense for a spin-off. The problem is, these bongos pretty much became Donkey Kong's entire identity during this era. We got 3 Donkey Konga games. The third one never left Japan, but still, 3 Donkey Konga games. Donkey Kong Barrel Blast on the Wii was originally a game designed for use with the DK bongos. The fact that these bongos went any further than just 1 or 2 Donkey Konga games is crazy. But the entire point of me saying the Donkey Kong franchise is a mess, I'm not talking about how the spin-offs play a little differently. That's why I didn't even mention Diddy Kong Racing, because those are spin-offs. It's like if I looked at Mario Kart and I went, wow, the Mario franchise has no consistency. What, we're doing a platformer and now a racing game? Now, I primarily want to talk about the mainline games in the Donkey Kong franchise. And we have Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, a platformer designed to be controlled with a pair of bongos. So this marks a moment where Donkey Kong actually came back to be an in-house Nintendo developed franchise. Nintendo EAD Tokyo developed this game, the same developers that would go on to develop Super Mario Galaxy. And Jungle Beat is incredibly strange. It feels like this game was designed almost as a challenge. Like, let's see if we can create a platformer that controls with bongos. And it works, and I think the DK bongos are incredibly unique. They're very interesting controllers. The problem I have with it is they hurt my hands to control. But DK Jungle Beat is more about like a score attack platformer. It isn't like a traditional Donkey Kong Country game. It's more about kind of the flow of how Donkey Kong is moving. You know, you want to get into a good kind of rhythm, even though this isn't a rhythm game, of like how you're moving around, how you're jumping, how you're clapping. You want to collect the most bananas possible. It's a very simple, yet incredibly unique take on a platformer. But like I said, it's weird. This game barely references anything from Donkey Kong Country. You have these tiny little helper monkeys now. You don't have Diddy Kong. You have these brand new villains here that have never really been seen since, outside of a couple little cameos. This is like a completely new subset of the DK franchise. It pretty much is taking Donkey Kong and doing yet another soft reboot of him where pretty much nothing from Donkey Kong Country is included here. You know, outside of the jungle setting and Donkey Kong's design from that game. It is is really interesting to see what Nintendo internally thinks of Donkey Kong themselves, because here we can see that internally, Nintendo really likes to emphasize how strong Donkey Kong is. You can see that throughout the entire game. Donkey Kong is really fucking strong in this game. They never really emphasized that as much with the DK Country games. It was more so like, oh, Donkey Kong is just bigger. He's the heavier guy. But Jungle Beat is yet another example of a mainline Donkey Kong game that pretty much ignores everything before and plays nothing like any other Donkey Kong game. It's pretty nuts how all 4 of these games are main Donkey Kong games, yet none of them play at all alike. These all honestly feel like they're from completely different series, outside of the fact that a big monkey is in each of them. And keep in mind, while I'm not really considering spin-offs for this major discussion, we were still getting Mario vs. Donkey Kong games, which we didn't even talk about the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I just don't own a physical copy of the original. Oops. Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the GBA was a flat-out successor to the Game Boy Donkey Kong game, which, you know, we can put in the arcade Donkey Kong series. I mean, Mario vs. Donkey Kong plays pretty much exactly like the original Game Boy Donkey Kong. It's literally the exact same idea of like, hey, you play as Mario, you're going after Donkey Kong, you want to find a key, get to the end of the level, solve the little puzzle, there you go. It's a very cute idea to continue the idea of that very first arcade Donkey Kong game in this brand new subset of both the Mario series and Donkey Kong series. But then this series took a completely different turn and turned into something completely different. The Mario vs. Donkey Kong series became about these mini Mario toys that you have to control, and they move on their own, and you have to try to get them safely to the end of the level. It's just crazy that we got like so many entries in this franchise based on that concept of Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2. Hell, we even got some weird ass like offshoots, like Mario and Donkey Kong minis on the move on the 3DS eShop. That doesn't play anything like these 2D games. But I feel like I kind of have to mention these, even though these are kind of in their weird spin-off side series, even though these are kind of the continuation of the original arcade Donkey Kong series. Even though, I mean, these fucking things lost the plot decades ago. But thankfully, they remade the original on Game Boy Advance on Nintendo Switch in 2024. And, you know, it kind of feels like, okay, this makes a lot more sense than whatever the hell the mini Mario's crap was. But then in 2010, we got a return to the Donkey Kong Country series with Donkey Kong Country Returns. And yeah, you know, I wouldn't really put these in 2 different categories, even though these do feel quite a bit different. I think Retro Studios, the developer of DKC Returns, really did a phenomenal job with taking the general feel and idea of the Donkey Kong Country games and rebooting it, kind of keeping that general feel, but evolving the gameplay in really meaningful ways. They changed up how a couple of things work, like, for example, how the dual playable characters work. In the original game, if you got hit as Donkey Kong, then you'd swap over to Diddy Kong. In this game, when you get Diddy Kong, you get 2 extra hit points. When you lose those 2 extra hit points, you just revert back to Donkey Kong, which, you know, I mean, like, that means that you're not really playing as specifically Diddy Kong throughout the game in single player. But I don't know. I kind of think this makes a little more sense. Diddy Kong allows you to hover. Yeah, you're not playing as specifically Diddy Kong, but it's like, you know, like, I just think this makes a lot more sense. They kind of tightened up a lot of stuff. I'd honestly equate what they did with DKC Returns in terms of like changing a couple of things up, adding some different moves here and there, to like comparing Super Mario World to New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Because New Super Mario Bros. Wii has a lot of stuff like, oh yeah, you have ground pound, wall jumps, you can do the mid-air twirl. But at the end of the day, it's still Mario. And I feel like that's the same thing with Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo compared to Retro Studios' reboot of Donkey Kong Country. We then got a sequel to this game with Tropical Freeze on the Wii U that plays pretty much damn identically. It's a true sequel in every sense of the word. And then the Donkey Kong franchise took yet another hiatus. We got literally like nothing for a decade straight until finally we got Donkey Kong Bonanza. This plays like no other Donkey Kong game. But I think that was kind of necessary because this is a 3D Donkey Kong game. And again, I don't really think Donkey Kong 64 is a great template for a 3D Donkey Kong game. To me, this is more of just a giant 3D adventure game with Donkey Kong in it. But bless DK Bonanza's heart, it really goes out of its way to honor the entire lineage of Donkey Kong. This game feels like it was designed to pull everything all together, honoring every single subset of this up franchise. You have references to the arcade games, Donkey Kong Country, Donkey Kong 64, Donkey Kong Country Returns. The DK bongos make an appearance on DK Island. It's crazy. But this game, regardless of all of the references, plays like no other Donkey Kong game before. And it's obvious they're doing that because, well, DK 64 isn't a great template. And it's also important to figure out, like, what Donkey Kong is. Like, what is Donkey Kong all about in 3D? And it's interesting that, again, now that Donkey Kong is being developed internally by Nintendo all over again, that they do keep emphasizing, yeah, Donkey Kong is really fucking strong. He's all about punching the shit out of everything. And this might be looking into things too much, but I do think that makes a lot of sense. You look back to the original arcade game, and it starts with Donkey Kong climbing up the girders, and as he walks over to the left side of the screen, all of the girders move with just him moving. Like, he's a heavy fucking guy. As much as I love the Donkey Kong Country games on Super Nintendo, it feels like they went a little too deep into just Donkey Kong's a monkey. Not saying that that's all he really was there, but you know, I mean, you look at like what Donkey Kong Country did and how it related to the Donkey Kong character that we knew before. And again, it's like there's really little there. It's pretty much just like, oh, let's put Donkey Kong in the jungle. He loves bananas now. I mean, it kind of boiled down to they were just making a monkey platformer game, and they had the rights to use the Donkey Kong name. But after decades and decades and decades of different Donkey Kong games hitting the scene, Donkey Kong Bonanza comes in, and this truly feels like a completely unique game. There's really nothing else like this, and this truly feels like a Donkey Kong game. And I think that's really cool, but it's crazy that it took this long to find what makes Donkey Kong unique and to turn that into a 3D platformer. But yeah, overall, I just wanted to take a look at the Donkey Kong franchise because I love pretty much all the subsets of the Donkey Kong franchise. As much as I like to just riff on it, while this is one of the most inconsistent Nintendo franchises, it's also one of the most consistently quality Nintendo franchises. Because guys, there's truly nothing else like a good-ass Donkey Kong game. The problem is, I don't know what a Donkey Kong game is. If you're a fan of Donkey Kong, I think you just like monkeys. What do these have to do with each other?